I'm Dr. Craig Escude, the host of IDD Health Matters, a podcast where we talk about health, wellness, and health equity for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Hope you enjoy it. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the IDD Health Matters podcast. I am excited to introduce our guest today, the Honorable Neil Romano.
Thank you.
Welcome, Neil.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
So we are coming to you from the American Academy of Developmental Medicine and Dentistry Conference, which is where I've had the pleasure of seeing Neil speak multiple times. But I'd love for you to just get started with kind of the background and eventually take us to how you ended up working in the field or having some focus on people with disabilities and intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. My background goes way back. It goes back to being a person with an intellectual disability. I have dyslexia, and having gone through a very early lifetime with, beginning my life, not being able to read, very, very marginalized by not being able to perform like the other children, and having that found out, and, realizing that in my own mind, while people were saying he can't do this and he can't do that I was thinking, well, I think you're wrong. And so I understood very early what it was like to be marginalized and what it was like to be a person with a disability. But then it was informed even more when my cousin came to live with me. My cousin Sandy lived with us. My mom and dad took her in, and she lived with us for 20 years. And she had Down syndrome. She had intellectual disability. And I think that during the time that she lived with me, I was a person with dyslexia. She had IDD, and she could do more than me. She could read. she could read the TV guide, But I was the one who had to go off to school and take spelling tests and be tortured, until I reached that point. So I realized that, there were different levels. And then, quite frankly, there's a whole lot of, lived and personally informed, things about disability. I had a brother who was a quadriplegic from the United States Marines from Vietnam. So I got to see disability from a lot of different points of view.
Personal, family.
All very personal, all very family. So when I did become more involved in terms of, working in government in that area, there was nothing about my understanding that was book learned.
Sure.
Everything was learned from working with people, understanding people, and frankly, recognizing that I was saying to some people today that when I was in high school, all my high school teachers, guidance counselors, everyone just begged me not to go to college. Begged me.
Wow.
They said, Neil, you
focusing more on what you can't do
exactly
and shouldn't do because you might have some differences than saying, you know what? You can do this.
Well, then they did exactly the opposite.
You proved them wrong.
Well, I guess in a way, but they had me already set up to go to a vocational program to become a baker. And I always say to someone, if I had become a baker, I would have been a good baker. You'd be buying my rolls right now. But as it worked out, I went to a small college that didn't require any SATs or anything, because I could never take that kind of standardized test. Went there, and there was a professor there who said, there's a lot going on there. And I went from a small college out on Long Island. The next thing I know is at New York University. He called some professors there, and I went over. And I graduated Phi Beta Kappa in 2 areas. Within, 4 years after being told I was going to be a baker. So that really informed me about intellectual disabilities and people not recognizing, how far a person can go and what they can do. Even today, I still have as much, I don't have as much, but I still have problems with reading. I still have problems with things. I have to be rested to read correctly. Even when I give talks and things, I rarely even use any notes. And I always make a joke about it. But the fact of the matter is, it's because primarily I just can't look down and read the notes. I read, but I'm saying it's not something I'm going to do publicly. I guess that was because I had spent so many years in school. being criticized, standing up and being laughed at when I had to read like other kids in grade school. And I didn't, I never took offense to that as a child, but I kind of didn't believe it. I kind of said there's more to be done.
And that's good that you didn't believe it, because I think sometimes we believe what we're told by authority figures and we just accept it. Oh, they say I can't do this, I can't do this. And you said, I think I can, and you did.
Well, it's not only me that would have believed it, but my parents would have believed it. Sure. I mean, they were, blue collar Italian American family. The teacher was God, and those people were important people if they said it was true. So my parents, would go along with what they said. But and as it turned out, they also decided that they needed to push me a little bit, and they were, they're pushing at that point was me trying to get me through high school, So I mean, it was an interesting, arc of going from not being able to do something to being able to do something, but really nothing changed. I was still the same person with the same background. But as my goal always was to be, when I was young, I had gone to Washington, D.C., and that was when they had the Poor People's March and stuff. And I remember when I saw that the first time, I just said, what are these people doing here? And, the 8th grader or 6th grader, and having my teacher say to me, well, people come here to solve problems. And I remember looking around at those buildings, and I said, someday I'd like to come here. I'd like to solve problems. That sounds like something I want to do. So I took government and politics in high school, in college, and I wound up running for Congress. And I ran for Congress for one reason and one reason only. I had some friends that had died of drug overdoses, and I didn't think anything enough was being said about it. And this was the beginning of the Reagan administration, and I ran for Congress on that, just on on drugs. And drugs.
Not literally on drugs.
No. I can barely have a glass of wine, not being able to process. But I wound up going to school, and wound up getting involved in government. Wound up going to Washington after I had run and lost, which was the best thing that ever happened, was losing, because I didn't expect to win. And that was one time I lived up to everyone's expectations.
Now, you ended up becoming the director of the drug control.
I wound up right. I wound up after that going to Washington and starting at the Department of Health and Human Services, actually working on a program about how technology can help people with disabilities. And it was all about it was just something that I wanted to do, and the director let me do it. And I worked on issues around the space program and all of the things from the space program that had technologically moved into the disability field: carbon fibers, telemetry, everything that had gone to help the lives of people be better, but primarily people with disabilities in many ways. So I always used to talk about the fact that, the three people with the most disabilities in history were the 3 people we sent to the moon. They couldn't eat, they couldn't move 5 feet towards where they wanted to go, and they did. And I said, if you can solve all those problems for people that are literally the people with the most, difficult time to do something because of the environment they're placed in, well, why aren't we doing that better for people with disabilities? So that became a kernel of an idea for me back then. But then I was invited by the Reagan White House to come over, and they did a program called the White House Conference for Drug-Free America, and I wound up running a section of that. And then I was invited to come over to the White House and be the Director of Communications for Drug Abuse Policy under the Reagan administration. And I spent my last year and a half with the Reagan administration there. From there, I had the opportunity to work with Just Say No, help continue to grow that program. Started a program called Cocaine, the Big Lie, worked on that, built that, developed that. Worked on a program called America Response to AIDS, which I think is still today the biggest public service program in the history of the federal government. worked on that. And then when I left the administration, I realized I liked public health. And then I realized I liked communicating. I liked being a communicator. And so I started a small company that built public-private sector initiative programs, primarily surrounding health. The first one was a very large program I did on chewing tobacco, which is where I met the dental community, because I worked on a program that I designed about chewing tobacco. It was the only program in the country on chewing tobacco. At the time, everyone was doing smoking.
Okay.
I was doing chewing tobacco, and actually, President Clinton at the time recognized it as the only program in the country, and it actually bent the curve on chewing tobacco. So,
did you work with football teams?
Baseball. I worked What we did was, this is always something I've done in my career, is I attacked the person to make them who is the worst person in the scenario and make him the best. So I went after Major League Baseball and basically said to them, guys, you're the worst offenders by having this on TV. You could be the ones that could do the most to change that. So I wound up being involved with one of the most amazing people in history, Joe Garagiola, who was known for being anti-tobacco. And we put together this program called NSTEP, the National Spit Tobacco Education Program. And that's where I meet Steve Perlman. That's where I meet everybody in the dental community who is working on these things, because they were working on that with me, and people like Henry Schein and so on and so on. So I developed a reputation for developing large and effective public-private sector initiatives, and that's what I did for a while. And then I was invited to do a talk about communications at the President's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities, just out of the blue. I was invited by their chair, who was named Madeline Will, who became a lifelong friend of mine, who is a giant in the disability field of IDD, who has a son with Madeline and George Will. Their son has IDD, and had the opportunity to work with her. And then I gave one talk. I came in, I was asked to do another talk to the committee. And then about 3 weeks later, I got an invitation from the White House to be a part of that committee, which till this day, I can tell you in all honesty, I haven't the slightest idea who picked me, who asked me to do it, why I was asked to do it, and so on.
And that committee is the National Council on Disabilities?
No, that was that was the President's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities.
Okay.
So I served on that. But then I was in the running to become the chairman of that committee. I was actually supposed to be elevated to the chairmanship but simultaneously I was asked by the White House if I would consider being the head of in the Department of Labor, the Office of Disability Employment Policy, called ODEP. And that was a huge opportunity for me. Being an assistant secretary would be a life dream for me. I'd be working in one of those buildings, have an office in one of those buildings again.
What do those people do?
But having an important office, having a corner office, but being able to really affect the lives of a lot of people with disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and disabilities across the board in employment. And the whole concept of what I worked on during that time was trying to explain that we should be looking at people in employment for what they can do and not for what they can't do. That has become, that's if there's one thing that resonates through my entire career, it's always saying, what can they do? Tell me what a person can do. So because of that, I became very heavily involved with trying to work with people to get employment with intellectual disabilities. And because of that, I had known this community, the place we're at right now, AADMD. I had known all of the players. I'd known all of these actors, and I'd known them for quite some time. And when I was working at ODEP as the assistant secretary, we were calling them people in, and they were, helping me out with things that I needed to know so we could get people, and that became very, very important to me. But I left there, and There was a point where, I had gone back to my business, basically kept working my business. But then I found out that I had one of the most advanced forms of leukemia, and spent the next 18 months in the hospital.
When was that?
Let's see, it's 13 years ago, so something like that. But yeah, I can't remember, 2013.
13.
And I wound up spending 18 months at MD Anderson. But the funny thing about it was during that time, and this is when it really, I get a call from the, at that time, Obama White House. And a young person who had worked with me over at ODEP said to me, we would like to have a person on the National Council of Disabilities who has a strong background in IDD and work. We want to make sure there's a profile there, and we'd like to know if we can ask a Republican senator to nominate you. I said, absolutely. But the funny thing at the time was, they said, how long is the term? And she said 3 years. I said, I don't know if I can give you 3 years, but I'll give you every inch of 3 years. Sure. And here we are 13 years later. I've been the chairman of NCD once, and then elevated to chairmanship by President Trump. And then I was then made just a regular member again. They elevated a different person than the Biden administration, which is the way it works. Mm-hmm. Doesn't bother me at all. Sure. And then under this administration, I was retiring. I was actually going to retire, and I was asked if I would consider serving as the vice chairman, and then the chairman left. And I find myself, once again, as I've said, I've never asked for a position. I'm back as the chairman of NCD. I'm very proud to work with that group.
The Reagan administration,
yes.
The Clinton administration,
yes. Mm-hmm.
The
Bush
administration,
mm-hmm.
the Trump administration, the Biden administration, and the Trump administration.
And the Obama administration.
And the Obama administration.
Yes.
That's pretty impressive.
I always
they must see something.
I'll tell you something. If we have a moment, I'll tell you something funny. Okay, sure. So the dream of my lifetime is being asked to be, at that point in my life, to be, for a guy that was supposed to be a baker, suddenly I'm being asked to be the Assistant Secretary of Labor for the United States. It was kind of a big moment. And I always say to people, what did I do? What did a good Italian kid from Brooklyn do? Well, I called my mother on the phone. I said, Mom, the president wants me to do this. And my mother was silent. It was this real long pause. I actually thought something went wrong. And all of a sudden, I said, Mom, are you okay? She said, yeah, I'm fine. But does the president know you can't read? It was one of those, it was one of those perfect moments where you say it's expectations. She said, and so I said, well, she said, I'd rather you be selling hot dogs in front of the White House because so I'm, and that's the kind of world that people with intellectual disabilities, they live in. And I always say there's no malice involved most of the time, sure. Because no one loves me more than my mother at the time. But but it shows a mindset, what he can't do. And then, quite frankly, when I see parents with people with intellectual and other disabilities, and they wrap their arms around them and protect them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that protection isn't the best thing they can do. It's a hindrance. Yes. So my goal has always been to show people with intellectual and all disabilities in a light where they're achieving. Show how they can achieve, show how they can change and get better. And, and kind of fight against the notion that they have a ceiling. Because I always think the ceiling for most people is in our own minds. It's not in theirs. Yes. We could convince them they have a ceiling. But so, as I said, my career for what it might be has been almost entirely informed by just looking at people and then learning from great people like Dr. Rick Rader and Steve Perlman, people who have been kind enough to talk to somebody who is a PR guy.
Well, just in talking with you, it's clear why you've been chosen to do all of those things. Let's talk a little bit more about the National Council on Disability.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
What is it? What's its purpose?
The National Council on Disability is a tremendous body. It is the probably the most important federal body. It's an independent federal agency, and independence very, very important because our job as an independent federal agency is we poke at the government. You
get to do that.
We get to do that. But we are independent to do that. So we will talk about what they're doing wrong at the Department of Transportation or what they're doing wrong. But the National Council on Disability cut its teeth by writing the first draft of the ADA. So that's really where it came from. So it is a group of people. They are generally 5 people are picked by the President of the United States. 2 are picked by the Senate, 1 from the Majority Leader, 1 from the Minority Leader. And then over at the House, it's 1 from the Speaker of the House and the Minority Leader. So you have 9 people, and those kind of rotate because every 3 years, different people come on and off. So you never know what the majority and minority is going to be. And I have to tell you, my 13 years there, I don't think anyone's ever cared.
Yeah.
We've never cared. It's a group of people
It is a universal issue that shouldn't be
right.
Party-based, I would
right.
say.
And it is not. I mean, we sit and, we pick out issues that we consider are particularly important. Right now, we've talked about issues, everything, from pre-COVID issues that we predicted what would happen during a pandemic, and we wrote papers on it that became very timely. Issues around work and people with disabilities. So many people with disabilities are marginalized. If you have a disability and you go to college and you complete the same degree as a person with an ability, or who doesn't have a disability, I should say, you've got probably a 35% less chance of ever being employed. Mm. And that doesn't make any sense. There's this huge pool of people out there that and they want to work. Every time we ask, even people that are on assistance, I'd rather be working. I'd much rather be working. And some people find that hard to believe.
That's a story you don't hear that often.
You
hear the other side.
You don't hear it. And part of the problem with that is, if I can be honest, is sometimes the NGOs involved, the non-governmental, in order to raise money, they have to talk about how badly off some of these folks are. Sure. And they can't do this and they can't do that. I explode when I hear the phrase, give them a hand up or something like that. It makes me crazy. But it's a mindset. And by the way, it's something I'm very, very concerned about as it relates to AI. What AI, since it just is a sponge of what other groups and things say, have said, and how those are going to be incorporated, right. What that is going to look like, and that's something. But NCD works on these kinds of issues. The group gets together, and everybody, most people, supply an issue that they would like to see, and then the issues get voted on, and then the top 3 get funded for deep dive research projects.
Well, I was really excited when Dr. Rader was on the committee, and when it was in 2022, the National Council on Disability Health Equity Framework for people with disabilities came out, and as a very strong advocate for educating all healthcare providers about how to provide good healthcare for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, having that as one of the top parts of the recommendation. I can't tell you how many times I've referenced that and shown the images on all the presentations that I do, because when I saw it myself, I was like, finally, there's somebody's truly calling attention to this. So thank you for that.
I thank you for saying that, but I should I should also tell you at the beginning of the outset of that, I was a chairman when we was starting on some of that, but then Andres Gallegos became the chairman, a wonderful man who sadly was taken from us too early. But we had Rick Rader on the committee at that time, Dr. Rick Rader from Tennessee, and we built out that whole program in so many different ways, and we're still working on it today. And that's the curriculum portion that people say, well, you're working on a curriculum portion. Aren't there other things? What you just raised is we've been working on this for 8 years. It's not something that's new. And it's been looking at all the various issues that then takes you to, well, why is this failing, among doctors? Why does it happen? Well, the fact of the matter is, if they're not being trained, then that's the failing. I said to someone, you understand the concept that if you go to if you get a toothache, you are not going to go to an orthopedic surgeon.
To give you the story I tell on that all the time is I'm a family doctor.
Mm-hmm.
If you came to see me for cataract surgery, it would not go well.
It wouldn't go.
You would be blind, or I would refuse to see you. Right. And it's not because I don't care. It's because I have no idea what to do or how to remove a cataract because I wasn't trained to do it. Right. And to me, so many of the health inequities that we see can be addressed in a big part by training healthcare providers on what to do and first of all, to see people with intellectual disabilities as people first. That's a big part of it as well.
Well, I mean, that's the key. That's the key to everything. I mean, the key to everything, quite frankly, is looking at the patient as simply another human being. Right. They have. I think because a lot of people don't get the opportunity to interact with people with IDD. Mm-hmm. Number one, I think they're scared.
I totally agree, and I can't say that I wasn't scared.
Yeah, and that's entirely fair.
And even as a clinician, the first time I saw a person with an intellectual disability, I was scared, not of the person, but because I wasn't sure what to do as a healthcare provider. I'm like, I'm not sure how to evaluate this person.
Exactly.
And that was very humbling, I will say.
Right. I mean, exactly. It isn't because they're not scared of the person or anything like that. It's that I don't know what to do. I just had a conversation with someone who is deaf. Okay. And I have seen people go into a full panic on that. And there was a time in my life when I have gone into a full panic. Or you look at the interpreter and talk to the interpreter and you forget that the human being that's giving the words is right there in front of you. And it's little things like that, learning little things like that makes all the difference. Well, when it comes to medical care, the curriculum will make all the difference to taking the fear out. If you're doing hands-on clinical work, then you're meeting some of these folks. I mean, and that right away is going to change. And by the way, meeting people with intellectual disabilities, spending time with them, you'd be surprised how quickly the barriers begin to go down, how quickly people begin to see. And one person once said to me, there was a young lady who from National Down Syndrome Society who has Down syndrome, who became a lobbyist. Because she went through all the paperwork and everything and became a full-blown lobbyist. And I have to tell you, members of Congress have said to me, she's dynamo. She's incredible. And someone once made the comment that when she was there, the IQ of all the lobbyists had gone up by 10 points because she was so pointed and so good at her work. So, I mean, it's giving people the opportunity to do that. And the medical model, sadly, has been a problem. I can't fix it. Yep. What am I going to do? And
in the term, there's a cautionary statement I say sometimes. We talk a lot about healthcare and improving healthcare for people with IDD, but I have to caution people that is not the same thing as the medical model. It's not seeing the disability as something that is a medical problem that needs to be fixed. It is advocating for good health care for everyone, including people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So please don't ever confuse the medical model with advocating for good health care for people with IDD.
I mean, good health care for let's just say good dental care, okay? Just good oral health care for a person with IDD. It changes so many other things because we know that good oral health care is connected to good overall health care.
And there's the argument for integrated medicine.
Yes.
Got to put that plug in there too. Our minds are connected to our bodies and our mouth and all of those things. Yep.
Well, I mean, and once people understand that, then you recognize that you now have a person who has the chance to go to work that has good teeth,
Yeah.
has a good smile. They're not hurting. They're not in pain. All of those things mean a lot. I mean, I know they mean a lot to the people that are watching this today. I know it mean a lot to people. The average American looks and says, yeah, you know, my good oral health care is important to me overall, my children. So, I mean, to me, it's always looking at people with disabilities and intellectual disabilities and never assuming that there's anything that you want that they don't want. Why would they? You know,
They have same likes, wants, desires, and that's where, you know, the learning to support people in what we talk about a lot, person-centered ways. Sometimes, yes, we have to balance what a person needs for health care, for things like that. But we need to always balance that with what a person wants for their lives, because we should all have an opportunity to live a life that we have some ownership over, that we have some positive control over, and that is and to do things that are important to us. We've in supports and services for people with IDD, I think we've been a little too heavily focused on what's going to keep people safe, what's going to keep them as, you know, healthy.
Right, yeah.
But we've got to balance that with what people
and
want.
And as I said, some of that's, you know, understandable, you know, especially when it comes to parents. There's no malevolence there. It's just, it's love it at the max. Like, you know, it's like, I'd rather you be selling hot dogs.
And frankly, for organizations,
Sure.
you know, they're worried about having a bad health outcome that could have been prevented. So they're going to, you know, focus on, all right, we can't do this. We can't let them do this. Oh, we had a person choke on a hot dog. We have to ban hot dogs forever and ever, and no one can ever have a hot dog. You know, it's finding the balance.
It's, you know, I always talk about, you know, it's 250th anniversary of the United States this year, and I always talk about, people always laugh at me because I have a favorite federal document. I say it's the, you know, everyone talks about the Constitution. I always talk about the Declaration.
I heard you mention that this morning.
Yeah.
And please.
And you know, and you know, the Declaration of Independence is that portion there that says all men are created equal, and they're endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among them is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I look at that and I always say, all is all. there's you can circle that, and I remember how many languages someone looked it up in once, and it means the same thing. It means everyone. But, you know, as I also say, I mean, the people that were there, you know, who wrote that, you know, they knew everyone was unequal. They knew it. I mean, they understand very clearly it's slaves if you don't own property. But as Dr. King said, that was a check that they wrote that we cash. We cash, each and every one of us. So there are different times in history of this country and the world when those checks get cashed. Okay? And 36 years ago, we made a promise with the Americans with Disability Act that we were going to cash that check. And it was time to get people with disabilities the full rights of every other citizen. And within that, you know, group of rights is the opportunity at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which in and of itself has a lot to do with good health care.
And I'm excited on the inside just to talk about these things. I'm Dr. Craig Escudé, President of Intellectability. State developmental disability agencies, managed care organizations, and providers across the United States use Intellectability's health risk screening tool, e-learn courses, and person-centered training to improve health equity for people with IDD. Visit replacingrisks.com to learn more about how you can employ these tools with people you support. So Neil, one of the things that I ask all guests is to tell us three things, 3 tips, 3 words of wisdom, 3 pieces of advice that you think can improve the world for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Well, I'll give you 3 words: respect, respect, and respect. Respect that a person is a human being. Respect that a person with an intellectual or any disability wants the same things you want. And respect the fact that as a citizen of this country, as a person, based upon what we believe, what we're supposed to believe as a country, okay, that those things should be offered to them, that the barriers should be taken down for them, and they should be given every right to move forward like anybody else.
What a great way to end this discussion. I think I could talk to you for probably hours, but I really thank you for taking the time to talk with me today, to share your background, your insights, your passion, but more importantly, thank you for the incredible work that you have done and are continuing to do in this field. You know this, it makes a huge difference to so many people, and thank you for that.
Well, and thank you too, because this is important too. Great.
The IDD Health Matters podcast is a production of Intellectability. Learn more about our health risk reduction tools and training for supporters of people with IDD by visiting replacingrisk.com.